Hi, I'm Rebecca Donnelly, Children's Librarian at Potsdam Public Library, and I have Melissa Stewart with me today. Melissa is the author of over 180 books for kids. That's right, over 180. And in addition to being a prolific writer, she is working very hard to raise the profile of children's nonfiction. And as you know, if you've been watching these videos, we are all about nonfiction, especially STEM nonfiction. So Melissa is the person to talk to because not only has she written many STEM books, but we are going to talk about one of her newest books, which is a book of essays by some of the best writers in the business, edited by Melissa with some introductory essays by her as well, Nonfiction Writers Dig Deep. Thank you so much for being here today, Melissa. How did you get the idea to put this book together?
The idea for this book started back in 2017 at the National Council for Teachers English annual convention, which happened to be in St. Louis that year. I was on a panel with two of the top leading authors, nonfiction authors of our time, Candace Fleming and Deborah Heiligman. And it was moderated by Allison Beecher. And we really started digging deep into what fuels us as writers and why, despite the obstacles and the setbacks and rejections, what keeps us engaged, what makes us work on a book, for many years, as compared to a child when they're writing, they don't even want to do a second draft. And so kind of what is the difference? And what we came to is that really every single book that we write, a piece of our heart is at the core of that book, and that our experiences in the world, our beliefs, our personalities, our passions, our fears are things that we are exploring as we focus our topic. And because we have a personal connection, we feel invested, we have skin in the game in a way that young writers often don't. And wouldn't it be great if we could help them to have that same kind of personal investment in their writing? How would that affect the quality of their writing, how interesting their writing is? A lot of times I go into school visits, and that's the number one that teachers say to me. They say, my students' writing is kind of boring. How can we breathe some life into it? And I think that this book has answers to that question.
I agree. I mean, this is something that I think about a lot as a writer and as a librarian, somebody who works with kids. And I want to particularly mention something that you say at the beginning, when you sort of realized, oh my gosh, kids really do struggle with ideas, but we authors, we almost have the opposite problem where we have too many ideas and we can't get to them all. And getting an idea doesn't necessarily mean that you have a book. It means that you have a little hook that you want to get back to. And so you have a solution for this in your office. And it's something that you say you think that we can bring to kids and that they can use. Can you tell us about your idea board?
Yeah, so right above my computer, I'm actually looking at it right now. I have a bulletin board. And so anytime I get an idea, I stick it up there. I, write it on a little piece of paper, or I, tear a magazine article out of the publication, something like that. And so then when it's time for me to start to write a new book, I can just look up there and I can look at those different ideas and I say, I'm not so interested in that one. Oh, but that one, I should really start to pursue that. And then I can dive into the research, and sometimes it might continue to grab my attention, and sometimes I might say, maybe that's not for me. But I have this giant pool of ideas that I can draw from. And I think that kids don't have. I think often the teacher will say, okay, it's time to write nonfiction, choose an idea. Or they'll say, okay, we're studying the Revolutionary War, everybody choose an idea within that umbrella topic. And the problem is the kids are stuck. Like they don't have an idea off the top of their head, and it might take them a long time to try to figure that out, and it's a very frustrating process. But what I recommend, so I have the idea board, and you could certainly have an idea board in your classroom, but I think in middle schools and in schools where they're changing classrooms, and even in elementary schools, what really works well is an idea incubator. And so what that is, most kids have a writing notebook. So on the last page, they write down ideas as they have them. And they should go through the world. Like, I think that's one of the things that authors do too, is we go through the world curious, open-minded, looking for ideas, engaging with everything around us. And I think if kids take that same approach, and in the book, there's a great activity that was created by author Jess Keating called One Amazing Thing that can really help students to develop those skills. So if you combine that with the idea incubator, where kids are constantly writing down their ideas, they can go and look at that list when it's time to write, and they can either pick one of those exact ideas, or let's say you give them an umbrella topic, the Revolutionary War, they can look at their list and say, you know, I have a lot of ideas and questions about weather. Well, maybe they could do a report about the weather during the Revolutionary War, because it turns out it was an extremely snowy period in history, and the weather patterns had a big effect on many of the different battles. Maybe another kid is interested in fashion. What did the soldiers wear during the Revolutionary War? It turns out there was a terrible boot shortage among the soldiers. Many of them were fighting barefoot in the snow. And what was that like? Like, that would be such an engaging thing for kids to write about. So it's not, if you're writing about the Revolutionary War, not every kid has to write about George Washington or the Battle of Bunker Hill. They can take whatever they're passionate about and look at the Revolutionary War through that lens. And then they're going to have this kind of instant engagement, this kind of buy-in that permeates the entire process. And when kids are more invested in the process and in their topic, that is absolutely going to come across in their writing. And their writing is going to be more thorough and more interesting for other people to read.
Absolutely. And what that does is it brings them a little bit more into the space that a professional writer approaches things, you know, because we don't just sit down and say, oh, I'm interested in the Revolutionary War, I'm going to write everything about it. We have to find some kind of angle to whatever that is. And the other thing I love about the idea of both the idea board and the incubator, basically any way of collecting ideas, is that it lets kids draw out the time scale a little bit. You know what I mean? Like, you have been thinking about this book that we're talking about since 2007. You know, kids don't get 13 years to work on anything at school. And I think that's part of the problem, is that they have these deadlines that they have to meet, which is totally understandable, but it puts a lot of pressure on them that it would be nice if they didn't have. So having that ready pool of ideas helps that.
Yeah, and I think also adult authors, professional authors, they also have a really good idea of things that they're passionate about, kind of ideas that they want to share with the world, maybe missions of what they want their writing to be about, themes that they find themselves exploring again and again. Kids haven't connected with any of that because, you know, they're 8, 9, 10 years old. This is a way to help them start to do that. And not that their passions, you know, something that they love when they're in 3rd grade may not be the thing that they're passionate about when they're, I don't know, 16. But the more that kids can learn the skill to identify their interests and utilize, you know, a lot of kids unfortunately don't really know how to be curious. And it's something that we actually have to teach a lot of kids. And so this book has ideas for how we can do that, because once they develop their curiosity, it's easier for them to identify their interests and their passions. And then, like you were saying, they can use that as an angle to focus their writing. Because anytime you write something that is an all about book, like all about, I don't know, weather or something, or all about the Revolutionary War, I don't know, anytime you write about a very broad topic, it's difficult to be engaging. It's much easier to use rich language, strong verbs, strong voice. It's much easier to do that when you have a more focused topic. And so we really need to I think the all about assignment should be abolished, because it just doesn't lead to engaging student writing. You're basically giving them a handicap before they've even started the process.
Right, you're sort of asking them to write the sort of book that, or piece that they might want to read if they wanted to learn all about something, but they don't know all about something. So, and that kind of leads into the way that you've organized Nonfiction Writers Dig Deep. You've got it in 3 main chapters, the choosing your topic and finding your focus and making it personal. And those I think are so important for kids. And in each of these chapters, I just want to say there are several essays by leading children's nonfiction authors explaining how they do those things. So you're really getting a look directly into how working writers today approach their craft. And there's a lot there that teachers and kids can learn from that.
Yeah, and so I think using the book as it's intended is powerful, but I also think there's other ways that you can utilize those essays. For example, if you're doing an author study of one of the authors who's in this book, then you can read their essay, and that will give you additional insight into who they are as people and what's important to them. And you can actually see, make connections between that and whatever books the students are writing. And that's a great way for them to understand what's behind nonfiction and again, fuel it into their own nonfiction writing process.
Yes, and I just have to say, I am all for doing author studies of nonfiction writers because I don't think that happens quite as much as fiction writers. But I mean, if you're a lover of kids nonfiction, you know that there are authors out there who have such a broad scope. They have written either deeply on certain types of topics or broadly on a variety of topics. There's so many ways that you could go with that. We're just about at the edge of our time here. Is there anything else that you would like to say about this book, or just anything that you would like to say in general to teachers or to kids today?
I sort of wanted to riff off the last thing that you said, because I think one of the things to think about, one of the reasons that people don't do author studies of nonfiction authors is because of the way the Dewey Decimal System works and the way that libraries are set up. That if you read, Prairie Lotus by Linda Sue Park and you love it, you're going to want to go read every other book that she's written. And it's easy to do that because when you go in the library, all of the books are by alphabetical order of the fiction author's name. And so you can find every book by Dav Pilkey or Linda Sue Park or Jacqueline Woodson. But if you wanted to find every book that I had written, you would have to look all over the nonfiction section because the books are organized by topic instead of by author's last name. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I think it's good, but I think we need to understand what that leads to in terms of our recognition of authors and studying them. I was actually doing a school visit for a group of kids in St. Louis yesterday, and one of the boys, because they're at home, he was Googling me while I was talking, and he said, "You have written some of my favorite books, but I never even knew who you were." Because you don't always look at who the author is, and you don't always, you're not, if you read a book about butterflies and then 6 months later you read my book about, I don't know, feathers, you may not make any connection that it's the same author. And so that's something that I think we really need to mention that idea to kids and to teachers and to basically everyone, that there are, and that's why in this book I love that we are able to include every author's photo, because it really helps us see that they are real people and they look just like us, and it says where they live. Many of them live in our neighborhoods, and so it's just exciting to kind of put a more human focus on these nonfiction authors.
That is so true. That makes me want to work even harder now to promote nonfiction and nonfiction authors, because I love nothing more than to recommend books to kids and get them excited. Well, Melissa Stewart, thank you so much for talking with me today. Oh, I just want one more thing. Is Melissa has a wonderful resource-rich website And if you just Google Melissa Stewart Celebrate Science, you will find it. You can, if you want to give us the address, you can.
Sure. Just if you just do Google Melissa Stewart author, it will pop right up. And then you can connect to my blog, which is Celebrate Science. But then there's also an educator's resource page, and that's where I have just tons of materials for teaching nonfiction writing.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. Nonfiction Writers Dig Deep, teachers. I have already recommended it to your BOCES, so look out for it.
Thank you. Thanks.